Well, good morning. It is so good to be here on this Easter morning and just celebrating the resurrection of Christ. And as we do this, one of the things I want to share with us just on this really special day is an aspect of God's heart that I want us to understand when we think about Easter and his resurrection and what it means. There's an aspect of his heart that I want us to have as a kind of lens that I hope causes us to just rethink Easter maybe in a new way. And I want to start off by actually reading a passage of scripture here that just, it kind of sets part of the motive here, but I want to work off of this. And you're more than welcome to follow along in your Bibles if you brought one. If not, we'll put the verses up on the screen. This is found in Luke chapter 19. And it's this simple statement, and it says this: "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save what was lost," right? And when we think about this idea that, right, Jesus came to seek and to save what is lost, we think about lostness sometimes. And oftentimes, the first place we go as people is we think about loss. We think about lost causes, right? We think about you've gone so far, like there's no coming back. There's something that is broken so bad, like it can't be fixed. That's oftentimes what we think of lost. And for some of you, like you think about that notion of like a lost cause, and it feels a little defensive. It feels accusatory. And maybe you grew up in a tradition that like pushed that on you in some way, and you bristle with it in some way, or someone else put that on you. And for others, I know it feels maybe a little honest, maybe not in a good way, but it feels honest. It's like, yeah, like I feel the shortcomings that I can't overcome that. My whole experience has told me there's this kind of lostness that is me or the people that I know. And it's like we're a lost cause in all of this. And today what I want to do is look at a story or a passage where we actually get to see what God says about what he thinks about when it comes to this idea of lost, right? So when Jesus says, "I came to seek and save that which is lost," what did he mean? What was he thinking when he thought of the lost? And the passage that I want to look at is actually a passage we've been looking at the last couple of weeks. There's this famous passage called the Prodigal Son. It's this story that Jesus taught. And if you're not familiar with it, that's okay. I want to walk through part of it because there's one aspect of it that we're going to look at this morning. But the story of the Prodigal Son, as it's most commonly talked about, is, of course, it is about this father who has these two sons. And one of the sons, the younger, which gets named the prodigal because he asks for his entire inheritance. He says, I want my inheritance and I want to go spend it and live the way I want to live. And we think about that and we go, that's kind of rude. But to understand in this culture in the first century, to say such a thing is the equivalent of saying to your father, "I wish you were just dead." That, any father in that first century culture would have read it that way. So it's not just that he is taking something or being selfish. He is breaking relationship with his father and his family. And so the story plays out, and this is exactly what it does. And his father, right, is so gracious that he actually gives him his part of the inheritance. And even then, the son still takes it, and it says goes off to a distant land where he lives, this wild life, this extravagant life. And of course, as he gets out there, he makes some really unwise choices. He doesn't take it, invest it wisely, and double his money or something like that. He goes off and he spends it until it's gone. And even worse, he can't just go and get a normal job because it says a famine hits the whole land. And now it's hard to get a job. And it's like you just see his life just spiraling out of control. And Jesus, as he unfolds this story, what he's doing is he's giving us this picture of this young man who goes out and he's just getting more and more and more lost. He's gonna give us like the extreme of this. In fact, at one point in the story, He loses everything he's got. He can't get a regular job. And so it says this in the text, and I'm going to flip over to, this is found in Luke chapter 15. So in Luke chapter 15, it says this in verse 15 as well. It says, so he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who, and catch this, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. Now, don't miss, this is a young Jewish boy who's gone to a foreign land, right? And to be Jewish, like you can't eat anything that is pork. To even touch pork of any kind would make you ritually unclean, which means anything else you touched, anybody else you touch becomes ritually unclean. And there's all of these ceremonies and all these things you'd have to do to become ritually clean again. And here he is. He is out feeding pigs. He's like wallowing in like where they live. This is a picture. Jesus is just painting this picture of like how low can you possibly get in this? And just when you think like you're as lost as you can get, he takes it like even one step deeper. And he says, it says this, verse 16, because now we see how this prodigal son is actually seeing himself in this. It says, he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. He's so hungry he would eat what the pigs are eating. And what Jesus just done, it's like he's the people in the foreign land that he's in. They look at him and they're like, yeah, he's a lost cause. He's not even as valuable as the pigs. And so it's like, no matter where this boy would turn, he would be seen as this kind of lost cause. And I think part of the reason Jesus tells this story and he just drives it down deeper, it's because in reality, we've all struggled at feeling a little bit lost. We've all had moments where maybe it was a temptation that just drug us in the opposite direction. Maybe you made a decision and you thought it was a really wise decision at the time and something went wrong and you just feel embarrassed. You feel like I should have known better, or there's just something going on in your life and your sense of self-worth just drops and drops and drops. And you just ever have a moment where you feel like I'm moving towards that sense of just being a lost cause? Maybe it's a marriage that blew up, or one of your own kids left, or you couldn't work things out with your parents or something, and you just feel like it's a mess. And what Jesus is doing is painting a picture that is so deep that no matter where any of us are in how we would feel it being a lost cause, in a way, this kid's reached kind of a deeper place. At the very least, we can identify with like, yeah, I've struggled with that. And we feel like a lost cause. But here's the thing. I think so often when we get pulled to that place of feeling like a lost cause, it's really easy to miss the Father's heart. And that's part of what Jesus is driving to in all of this. Because the reality is, we get to have this other picture of the Father, right? As Jesus walks through this story, it's kind of like we get to see what's part of the story going on in this foreign land, but we also get glimpses of this Father over here. And the thing that we can see and come to know even more, that we'll see here in a little bit, is that for this Father, there is never a moment that this Father would look at his son as a lost cause. Never. But it's easy for us to feel that. Maybe you feel that a little bit. When it comes to how God sees what it is to be lost, here's what we learn from this little story that Jesus teaches here. When God thinks of lost, he thinks of something he values that he wants back. It may be gone, but God thinks of it as, this is the thing that I value and I want it back. And that's different than seeing something as a lost cause. Because when we see something as a lost cause, it's drained of its value. We struggle to see worth in it. And that uniquely never happens with this. For God, it's like something's missing, but that thing that is missing, that thing that is lost, it's valuable to him. And we all have experienced this in little ways and big ways. Ever lose your car keys? Yeah, and you didn't just say, well, that's a lost cause. You're like, no, where are my car keys? And you're gonna try and find them. Or your phone, right? How many times have you been searching around the house for your phone and you're just like, where is my phone? And it's usually in the refrigerator, right? And it's just like, oh, that's right. We even make devices for our devices to find our devices when we lose our devices. Have you noticed that? Yeah, it's because we hate that. And when there's something we value and it's missing, we still hold it with value. It's just, how do I get it back? Years ago, my son had been saving up. He was a sophomore in high school and he didn't have a phone yet. And he finally saved money and his birthday was coming up, and with his birthday money, Chandler and I were talking about this earlier this week because I told him, I said, I'm gonna use this story about you. And he was like, oh yeah, I couldn't wait for my birthday to get there because then I knew I'd have enough money. And he went and he bought his very first phone. So I took him down to Circuit City, which is lost now. They never come, who knows, right? We went down to Circuit City and this is how long ago that was. The iPhone 5 had just come out, yeah. And so he got an iPhone 5. He's like, it's the 5. I've got an iPhone 5. And he loved that phone. I remember, they do the thing, you open it up and it's just like, here's my iPhone 5. And he loved it and he, downloaded stuff on it and and it was great. And that was in August. And then that October, so just a few months later, our student ministry took a trip to Magic Mountain. And they were taking a trip pretty much every fall over to Magic Mountain. And so he was with a bunch of his friends and they went over to Magic Mountain. And when he was telling me about this week, he says, it was so wonderful because that ride is like 8 hours on a bus, Dad, right? And then you have to watch whatever movie they put on the bus and you just hope you get a bus that has like a video player or whatever. He said, but when you have your own phone, you get to watch whatever you want to watch. You get to play the games you want to watch. And he just talked about, he got to show off his phone to all his friends. Picture a high schooler, a sophomore in high school, getting to show off his very first phone, right? And he gets over to Magic Mountain and he was so careful with it. He's like, I never put it in my back pocket because I didn't want anyone to steal it. I didn't want it to fall out, especially like on one of the rides. So he always kept it in his front pocket. And as he's telling the story, he's always like, and I was just like this. I got that phone in my front pocket, always checking that phone in my front pocket. And so he gets on this ride called The Scream. And y'all kind of know where this is going, don't you? Yeah, it's a sad story. Yeah, there were tears in this story. And he gets on, and on every ride, he was always checking his phone and making sure it was in there. And remember in The Scream, he said, had like these 2 loops. And he remember going through one of the loops, and it's like, and he's like checking his phone's there. And then he goes through the next loop, and they get down, and he gets, and he's not even completely off the ride. Like it's pulling in to ready to stop. And he's like, my phone, where's my phone? And he's like, and he panics in this moment because he realized that second loop, it had to have, it had to come out. And so he immediately is like, how do I get back under this ride and figure it out? And it's all fenced off. And he runs over to the people running the ride. And he's like, I've got to get into the ride I've got to get my phone back. And they're like, no, you can't do that. Like that's no one's allowed back there. He's like, no, you don't understand. This is my new iPhone 5. I've got to get it back. And they're like, sorry, no one gets to go in there. And it's just like, what is he going to do? And so he wants to go to the office. But on these trips, it's like no one's allowed to be by themselves for safety's sake. And his small group leader, Josh, is like, listen, like you all have to stay together. And he's just begging Josh, I got to go to the office. I got to talk to someone to let him get in there and get my iPhone. I've got to do this. And finally Josh was just like, okay, if you can talk one other person, right? It's the buddy system. If you can talk one other person, here's the key. To give up on going and riding the rides because you're gonna go have the fun of being in an administrative office someplace, right? That's the reason everybody goes to Magic Mountain, is to go into the office, right? So he finally talks one of his friends who seems a little bit like Jesus at this point, who goes with him for this long ordeal of waiting for someone to come. And he finally gets to meet this lady, comes out and goes, okay, what can I do to help you? And he explains, I lost my phone on this ride and somebody's got to go in there and find it. And she's like, well, A, you probably dropped it from like 50 to 100 feet. It's probably busted up, not working. And besides that, how would we wouldn't even know where to look. If you've seen how big the ride is, and he's like, no, you don't understand. He's begging. He finally takes a sheet of paper and draws a sketch. And he's a pretty good artist. Draws an entire sketch of the entire ride, right? And he goes, so it was on this loop right here that it had to have come out. And he marks the spot. I think the phone would tell them to look right here. And you can just see the staff. Yeah, we'll get right on that, right? And they take the paper. And he's like, don't you need my phone number or my address, like my home? And he's like, oh yeah, just write that on there. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Okay, right? So then my son gets back on a bus for an 8-hour bus ride back with no iPhone. You know, he missed it. It was lost, right? And he got home and he tells us about it. And I remember thinking, dude, your iPhone's probably gone, right? It's a lost cause. But he would not give up on it. He actually called Magic Mountain. He goes like, so did you get my drawing? Did you get my map? Did you check up on that thing? And all he got back was like, you know what? We'll contact you. You don't have to contact us. But through that whole thing, when all of us had given up on it, he never did. And then one day, one glorious day, like a week later, I know, true story, this package comes in the mail. And he rips open the top and pulls out what looks like an FBI evidence bag, right? It really does. And it's got like this writing on it, it's semi-clear, and there's this red tape, and he pulls the red tape thing off. He reaches in, and it had like this paper in it, and all you could see was the paper through it, and he pulls it out and realizes it's the drawing that he made for that lady. And then down inside there in the paper was his iPhone 5. And it was like, and he was like, and plugged it in, and when it came on, he was just like, and I kid you not, I watched him experience, and it was like bashed up on the side, it wrecked one of the numbers, and the screen was cracked, but you wouldn't know that. In that moment, I watched my son experience more joy, right, at having a busted up iPhone 5 that was once his and lost, but is now back, right? And the joy he experienced was 10 times what he experienced even when he first bought it down at Circuit City, right? And here's why I share that story. If a teenager can experience that kind of joy over an iPhone, how much more must God be overjoyed at the idea that one of his creatures, one of his creation, is back to him. And that's part of what Jesus is doing with this story here. He wants us to understand the nature of who God is. When something is lost, God sees lostness is the thing that he values, and he wants it back. He doesn't see a lost cause when he's looking at human beings. And this is why Jesus just pulls this story all the way down, like as low as it can get. And so here's the turn in the story on this, is that this son finally just hits this absolute low point where he wishes he could eat what the pigs are eating. No one will help him. He is the lost cause to everyone. And there's this beautiful moment when he starts to think about his father. And I love what Jesus does here. There's a kind of brilliance to what Jesus does here, because Jesus still pulls us in this moment, and yet starts giving us this glimmer of what the Father is like, what God is like in this moment. Because this son, in this moment, he's got to feel like a lost cause. And yet as he starts to think about his father, it's like, I wonder what it would be like to actually go home. And the text, the story says this. This is verse 17. It says, and when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And I am here starving to death, right? And he's just like, even at the lowest point with my father would be better than this. And it's just this beginning point of just thinking about his father. And then he goes on, he prepares this little speech. What would I say to my father? And this gives us kind of an insight into where this boy is at this moment. Verse 18, he says, I will set out and I will go back to my father and I will say to him. So here's his speech. He prepares this speech for his father. Father, I have sinned. I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. And it captures the tension that I think we feel sometimes, especially when we think about Easter in this moment. There's this tension because if there's a part of you that thinks of yourself as like a lost cause, or you get overwhelmed by like, it's just, I'm so far from what I think God would want. But we feel this tension, but it's like, I want to move toward God in this moment. One of our elders really captured this for me this past, a couple of weeks ago, Bob Zermack. We were talking after one of the services, and he was just reflecting on the spiritual journey that God has had him on over decades and decades and decades of life. And he talked about the church that he grew up in. There was a prayer that they prayed in every single service, every single Sunday, he said. And this prayer that we prayed every single week, it started off this way: I, a poor, miserable sinner. And he said, I didn't think about it back then, but we would pray that prayer over and over. I, a poor, miserable sinner. A little bit like you poor, lost cause. And it was interesting to watch him reflect on it and how over time he's been on this journey where he has come to see that, well, yes, he's a sinner, that vision of I, this poor sinner, wasn't the story that God wanted to have in his heart. It wasn't the identity that he wanted for him. And it begs this question in moments where we read a parable like this. And it's like, does sin matter? Is sin important? And I'd say yes, absolutely. Sin separates and sin is a problem. But maybe the more important question is this: is sinner the core identity of how God wants each and every one of us to see ourselves? Because when your core identity becomes, I'm a lost cause, there's this aspect of God that you miss, that you don't get to see. And this plays out even in these moments where we think about Easter. We begin to think of Easter as this celebration about us, right? Poor lost causes, poor wretched, miserable sinners. And there's a God who reluctantly, out of his great character, will graciously provide a way for us to overcome our sin. And that's a good story. But it's not the story of Easter, friends. It's not the story of the prodigal son. It's not the story of Jesus. It's not God's story. Because what happens next in this story, I think in the first century when Jesus first says this, I think this is the most scandalous part of this entire story here in this next moment. Here's what happens. So he comes up with this prayer, right? He comes up with this speech that he's going to give his father. And he works through it. And then in verse 20, it says, so he got up and he went to his father. And I love that he does this. Even though he's holding this prayer, like I know I'm this poor, miserable, lost beyond hope person, but maybe even though I could never go back to my father and become a son again, maybe my father would find room in his heart for a lost cause. Maybe he'd find the grace to let a lost cause come back and live in the bunkhouse, live as a hired hand. Maybe I could do that. And sometimes we feel that. And so this boy, he gets up, it says, so he got up and he went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, right? Because he's memorized this little speech. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And this is the part where Jesus flips the story. He doesn't get to finish his spiel, because the father interrupts him. Here's how the next verse starts off. But the father said, interrupting him, said to his servant, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him, to bring a ring to his finger and sandals on his feet. And all of these are symbolic of making him a son again. These would have all been things of, these are signs that he's my son. And it's like the father hears him going through this speech, I've sinned against heaven and against you. And you can just see the father going, yeah, I know that's true, but that's not the point of what's going on. Let me be one. And it's like his father's like, stop. All the things that would be symbols of you being a son, put them on you. Imagine that boy in the middle of his rehearsed speech, a boy that is just carrying a weight of, the only way anybody sees me at all these days is I'm a lost cause. I'm a lost cause to my older brother. I'm a lost cause to my village. I was a lost cause to the people that were living in the distant land. I'm a lost cause to myself. And of course, I'm going to be a lost cause. And before he can finish his speech, imagine those arms going around him and hugging him. Because when God thinks of lost, he thinks of something of the greatest value to him, that he's lost, but he wants it back. And this is the moment the father gets back what he wanted. This is the moment for celebration. Friends, this is the heart of God. This is how he sees you. See, so now when you think about Easter, and this is why this is so important that I want to point to on this day, we don't celebrate Easter as lost causes who somehow got a benevolent, graceful God reluctantly to provide a way of forgiving us. We celebrate this not just because of the lostness we experience, and don't miss this, but there is a God who is experiencing lostness for you and you and you and you and you and me. Before the creation of time, he saw you and loved you because you were his creation. And the fact that we were lost to sin, that for God, he experiences the lostness of you and I promise, more than how we experience that lostness. And so Jesus tells a somewhat scandalous story of a father who says, my son was never a lost cause. And I waited, I would do anything to have him back, and he did. That is the story of Easter. It is a God who said, if it means dying on a cross to get back the thing that I want and I treasure, I'll die on a cross. I'll gladly die on a cross because he loves you. Do you understand the difference in that story? See, I think this gets missed on us at times. Probably close to 3 decades ago, I read a true story out of a book written by Philip Yancey. And I think the name of the book was What's So Amazing About Grace. I could be wrong about that. But in this story, he told the true story of a young girl that was kind of that prodigal child. And I remember the first time I read it rocked me. There was something about reading a real life contemporary story that rocked me in a way that it caused me to see this story about the prodigal son in a different way. And it caused me to see what Jesus was doing, that he wanted us to understand God's heart in a new way. And I want to read you part of this story, but it's a true story, and I think this took place in the 80s. This young teenage girl lived in Traverse City, Michigan, in a conservative home with very conservative parents, with all, everything you can imagine. And she dreamt of having her own freedom and living life the way she wanted to. And there was this constant clash between her and her parents, and especially her dad. And one night, her and her dad got into this horrible argument. And she stormed in her room, and she decided in that moment she was going to leave, and leave she did. She ran away from home. She even calculated that my parents might come looking for me all the way down in Florida or California, but the one place they won't look for me, and in her mind, it was because they saw all the newspaper articles about all the terrible stuff going on in Detroit, Michigan. And she said, if I go to Detroit, Michigan, my parents will never think I went there. And she goes to Detroit, and she gets there, and life is actually pretty good for her. She's this young girl. She gets treated well. Life goes smooth. In fact, there's a moment where Philip Yancey says, and it made her believe that her parents were intentionally hiding the good life from her all along. And this was life. But of course, as a young girl in Detroit, that didn't last long. And it wasn't long before she found herself struggling with addiction, which led to her just selling herself because she could make lots of money at that. And at first, that just ushered her into an even better lifestyle. She lived in a penthouse. She could get room service anytime she wanted. It was wonderful until she started getting sick, until the signs of that kind of life started to show on her. And suddenly, faster than the blink of an eye, it was like she was on the outs. Before she knew it, she was homeless, and she was still turning tricks just to pay for her habit. And one night she found herself sleeping on a metal grate where there was warm air coming out of a department store through the grate, just trying to keep warm in Detroit, Michigan. And it hit her all of a sudden. She started dreaming of Traverse City, Michigan, dreamed of the cherry blossoms that would bloom in that time of year in Traverse City. And she says, in that moment, all I wanted was to go home. But how? And so as she thought about it and planned on it, she actually called her house, called 3 times, and didn't get anyone. In fact, on the 3rd time, she finally left a message. This is like back in the 80s. There wasn't voicemail. It was a cassette tape and a machine, right? That she left this message. And she left a message and she said, Mom, Dad, I was thinking about coming home. And I've got a bus ticket for tomorrow night, and I'll get into Traverse City a little before midnight. And I understand if you're not there. And if you're not, no problem. I'll just stay on the bus and I'll get off like when the bus makes it to Canada or something like that. And so she gets on that bus and starts this long journey. And Philip Yancey writes that it would take about 7 hours. And in that time, she starts making these plans, what she's gonna say to her dad and how she's gonna show up. And all of a sudden, it's like she realizes all the flaws in her plan. What if they didn't get the messages? What if they're gone on vacation? What if they're so shocked they're not ready for me? And she starts panicking as she's thinking about all of this, and she's on this bus ride, processing all of this. And I wanna pick this up from Philip Yancey's book. Here he writes, her thoughts bounced back and forth between those worries and the speech that she was preparing for her father. And very much like that prodigal son, she prepared this speech. And here it is. Dad, I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. It's not your fault. It's all mine. Dad, can you forgive me? And she says the words over and over, her throat tightening, even as she rehearses them. The bus has been driving with the lights on since Bay City. Tiny snowflakes hit the pavement. She's forgotten how dark it gets at night out here. Every so often, a billboard, a sign posting the mileage to Traverse City. Oh God, she prays. When the bus finally rolls into the station, its air brakes hissing in protest, the driver announces in a crackly voice over the microphone, 15 minutes, folks. That's all we have here. 15 minutes to decide her life. She checks herself in a compact mirror, smooths her hair, licks the lipstick off of her teeth, and wonders, are they there? Will they even recognize her if they see her? She walks into the terminal, not knowing what to expect. Not one of the 1,000 scenes that she played out in her mind prepares her for what she sees. There in the concrete walls and plastic chairs of the bus terminal in Traverse City, Michigan, stands a group of 40 brothers and sisters and great aunts and uncles and cousins, a grandmother and a great grandmother to boot. And they're all wearing goofy party hats and blowing noisemakers. And taped across the back wall of the entire wall of the terminal is a banner that reads, "Welcome home." Out of the crowd of well-wishers, in breaks her dad. She stares out through the tears quivering in her eyes like hot mercury and begins the memorized speech. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know." He interrupts her. "Hush, child. We've got no time for that. No time for apologies. You will be late for your party." And that's the story of the prodigal. And that's the heart of God, friends. So when you think about Easter, what we're invited in is not a God who reluctantly looks at us and says, "Okay, I guess I'm willing to do this, even for a lost cause." He got on that cross because he said, you and me and all of us, you don't know how precious you are to me. And I will do whatever it takes. And the beauty of this, on Easter, we celebrate a God who would do nothing short of anything that we might be invited back to have relationship with him. So here's what I want to do on this Easter, okay? I'm going to just cut to the chase. If you've never started a relationship with Jesus Christ, I invite you to do that this morning. I don't care if you feel like you're a lost cause, if you feel like you're a wayward child, if you feel somewhere in between, if you want to know what it is to have a relationship with a God who treasures you from before the creation of time, in a few moments, I'm going to pray through a very simple prayer. And I just invite you to pray that prayer, okay? There's no magic words to it. I'm gonna just say one phrase at a time, and you just say the phrase after me. You can even use your own words if you want, but it is a simple prayer of saying, "God, I come back to you and I trust you with my life. I know I trust you to take care of my sin, but more than that, I trust you with my life, that you are the one who loves me more than anyone in this world. And you can start a relationship with the most amazing God ever." So if you want to do that, pray that prayer with me right now. Why don't you just, I'm going to ask everyone to just close your eyes, bow your heads. And again, if you want to pray that prayer with me right now, I invite you to do it. I'm going to just say it one phrase at a time. Pray with me now. Dear God, I come before you right now, just as I am. I come to you with my flaws, the things that I worry about, the best of who I am and the worst of who I am. And I just give it all before you. And I invite you into my heart to not just become my Savior, but to become my God and my friend. I trust you with my life. Amen.